So in the House, we have 25 Democrats, 35 Republicans. That means that in order to get to tie, we need 5. Realistically, I think we can get to 3. LD10 in Tucson, where Todd Clodfelter is currently serving, I think is a prime example of a seat we never should have lost in the first place. So just if we hold on to what we have now, we can, I think, for sure pick up LD10. We have a lot of strong candidates. The primary is going to be great because we have a lot of really strong, great Democrats who are running up there. That being said, when we look at the rest of the state, because of the way that the districts are structured, the majority of the Democratic caucus is in safe Democratic districts. We only have 2 people who are in competitive districts. And that's on us. Democrats in Arizona think raising money is dirty, it's bad. I talk to my colleagues in the legislature all the time who say, well, I don't like calling people, I don't like doing this. And I said, do you like to lose? Because if you do, we keep doing what we've been doing for 45 years. We need to do more on gun violence prevention. We need to do more on women's rights. So that's why I'm saying we need to do better to make sure that we take seats. We need 2 seats to pick up the state Senate. Oh. And so we just need 2.
And where's Alma?
And my sister Alma is running for the state house up on the west side of Tucson. So her district would be the U of A all the way to the west side.
Okay.
Well, what does it mean to be a Democrat in 2018? And some of the things that we talked about, and my definition is not expansive and it doesn't cover everything, but it means that we stand up for women, that we stand up for immigrants, that we stand up for education, and that we stand up for the people who have been marginalized traditionally by this country. So that doesn't mean that the pie gets smaller because we are all trying to do something to make sure that immigrants, that women, that people of color, that women especially who have been being paid far less than their male colleagues forever are now going to make it harder for men to have jobs. It means that we're all working to have the same fighting chance and that we have an equal playing field. So it's the question of equity instead of equality, and I think that's one of the things that sometimes gets lost. So if we just give everybody an equal playing field, that's not enough. Because we know that a lot of times, especially if you are somebody who is, we were talking about voting earlier, if you've never voted before and you get an early ballot in the mail and you've never seen it, this 2-page double-sided document is overwhelming. So we need someone who is there to make sure that they know what's happening, what's going on, and how it's going to impact them. So for me, a Democrat is somebody who stands up for women, people of color, the marginalized communities, stands up for common sense. And I think that's one of the things that we see far too often is missing. So for me, when we're looking towards the future, it's not saying that we're going to raise taxes on the rich and fund all these new programs. It's saying if we as a state can't finance and pay for the basic necessities to make sure that all Arizonans have a somewhat decent quality of life, then we're not doing enough as a state. The budget is a document that reflects our values. And if we are making it so that teachers are spending $1,000 a year to buy school supplies, but we're only paying them $35,000 a year, there is something wrong with that budget document. So we need to do more to make sure that everybody's paying their fair share. You know, I got hit a little bit last year. There was a taxation bill that had to do with digital goods that I was working with some Republicans, and until we take back more seats, I would much rather have 60% of what we can get instead of 100% of what we don't want. So let's try and find solutions until we can take back seats. But when we're looking at things, it shouldn't just fall on the poor to raise to raise sales taxes to fund basic things like education. It shouldn't just fall on one group of people. We should all be working collectively to make sure that we're funding the things that we need to fund as a state. That means that we're not just funding things for the lowest level, that we're funding things so that we don't have to constantly say, Arizona is the 48th in the country for education, for healthcare access. You know, all the things that we should be first in, we're last in, and all the things that we should be last in, we're first in. It's the 8th deadliest state, 6th deadliest if you're a woman, because of our issues around gun violence, but also because of issues due to lack of access to affordable and accessible healthcare. We have so few providers in Arizona that if you live in rural Arizona, you may not have access to basic things like a primary care physician. A lot of rural hospitals don't even have anesthetists, so we've had to work to try and get certifications for nurse anesthetists to be able to provide services, because we can't even recruit these healthcare workers to live in these communities. So a state that can't do these basic things is a state that's not doing its job. And that's where I think the most basic thing is we need to have a state where everybody has a decent quality of life and has an opportunity to fight to make a good living. Happening, and it's a problem, the fact that there are so few providers that people have no choice when it comes to basic things like healthcare. And that drives up the cost of healthcare for so many of us. I'm fortunate that as a state legislator, I get my healthcare covered by the state, but I talk to constituents all the time who their premiums are going up. They're looking and they're saying, do I go with this kind of plan or this kind of plan? But they're all under the same umbrella. They're all under the same company, or they're all under the same provider. So competition has meant that we have less competition has meant that we have higher costs in healthcare. And for many of the people, especially here in Green Valley and Sahuarita, there are not as many choices, so people have to do what? Drive up to Tucson, or go to a place that has a specialist come in once a week or once a month. And that's not enough, because we have so many people who need that kind of healthcare who shouldn't have to drive 100 miles to go from, Nogales to Tucson. They shouldn't have to go from Amado to Tucson or to Yuma to get access to basic healthcare. I believe that it's only been a year and a half since this happened, because it feels like 10,000 things have happened since. But in 2017, the Republican-led legislature put in the largest expansion of these things called ESAs, which are backdoor vouchers. Empowerment scholarships accounts originally started so that low-income students who were disabled had access and could take their money to go to a parochial school or to buy supplies. When it was limited in scope, it made sense, because there are some things that just we cannot provide, especially the way we've been defunding our schools. Then the next time it's, okay, let's give it to Native American students. Every time it's been an expansion. This time, what they did is they increased it so that any child who is in the state of Arizona could take this voucher and go to a private school. The problem with that is most of the kids that were getting these vouchers didn't actually go to public schools in the first place. Their families could already afford to pay for them to go to these parochial schools. And there was a problem of deep fraud in the system. Because what they used to do is they basically gave you a debit card with the amount of money, and they said, here you go. So what they found out in the investigation that the Arizona Republic did is people were buying flat screen TVs. They were buying trips. So it started out as a system that I think was well-intentioned, and when it was limited in scope, it made sure that there were kids who needed additional assistance could have other options. What it has grown into is the fight over education reform in this country. Arizona is the first place in the country to expand vouchers so massively, which is why when Governor Ducey signed the bill, he got 3 congratulatory tweets. Betsy DeVos, Kathy Herod from the Center for Arizona Policy, and Jeb Bush. So for us, Jeb Bush, because this is one of the things that they've been pushing for, to take what they are calling backpack dollars and take them wherever you want. The problem with that is, since we've been underfunding our public education system, this is drawing money away. And even though it had a cap, the person who was pivotal in it passing was told, oh yeah, we'll put a cap on it. And the same people that told them they were going to put a cap on it said, it's coming off next year. Wow. So a group of parents and a group of educators got together. They started Save Our Schools Arizona. They were able to put it on the ballot. They stopped it from going into effect. So the funny thing is, in order to stop it from going into effect, you have to vote no on 305. We fought back on it, and I'll give you a quick story, and then I should probably wrap up because I know it's getting late. But when the legislature was debating this, I said, we need to be ready as Democrats. We know it's coming. We had heard from day one that it was going to happen. And my colleagues in the House said, well, let's worry about it when it happens. The night before it went on the floor, we got a version of the bill, and we knew there were going to be amendments probably, but when that happened, I said, let's do 40 amendments. Let's do 50 amendments. Let's make this as hard and as difficult as possible. Let's make this as painful as possible. Because if they're going to pass this, we can't stop it, but we can make sure that the public knows what's going on and make sure that they have to sit through hours of us debating ways to make it so that we have to have some accountability in this money. Because if you're using public dollars, there should be accountability. So the night before, a couple of friends and I, including Representative Kirsten Engel from LD10, Mitzi Epstein and Kelly Butler, are talking, and we saw the version of the bill. We called the Democratic leadership, and they said, "Nope, the Arizona Education Association told us they got the bill, they got the votes to kill it. Go home, rest up. Tomorrow's going to be a long day."
No.
And I said, "No, because if we do that, what's going to happen is we're not going to have the votes. They're going to jam it through, and then we're going to wish we had done something to stop them." So I was overruled, and again, I was a freshman. I was naive a little bit, and I said, you know what? If they say they have the votes, they probably do. Meanwhile, I'm texting my Republican friends saying, hey, how are you feeling about the bill? And each one of them, who I reached out to, who the AAA said, oh, no, they're definitely voting no, said, it's going to be a tough vote. They wouldn't have been saying that if they were going to be voting against it. So we get to the morning of, we have this big moment where we all get up and walk out of the House, make a big scene. We go over to the Senate. We're in the Senate hiding because they dropped the bill at 10 o'clock in the morning and the amendments at 10:01, and we were supposed to be voting on it at 10:05. So we had no time to read 72 pages of amendments, no time to actually dig into what the policy was, and because the Republicans had the votes, they were trying to just jam it through. So we're in the Senate trying to delay and trying to read. And then what happens, and this is a funny story, is the majority leader calls some of our Democratic leadership and says, you all have to get back here. Otherwise we're going to send DPS after you, Department of Public Safety. I said, let them. Because this is the most important issue. And if we aren't willing to stand up and do something, we have no spine, and then the Republicans will know that they can hold us. And what happened? The Democratic leadership team said, let's go back. So of the 25, 23 walked right back over to the House as soon as they got that call from the Republican leader. And I said, what would have happened if we had stayed is they would have had to drag Macario Saldate, who is in his late 70s, and Leila Alston, who has half a lung because she had a lung removed. You know what? Make them drag those two people back to their seats, because that way we get to show that it's that important that we're willing to be dragged back, kicking and screaming, because this is the biggest issue that's impacting public education in the last 20 years in Arizona.
Yeah.
Daniel, you're causing too much of a scene. So what happens? We come back, the Republicans shoved it through, and that's when I said, never again am I ever going to let anybody, including my own leadership, tell me that we shouldn't fight back. Because the lesson that we should have learned at that point was, the Republicans know that we're too afraid sometimes to fight them back. And there have been multiple times where I've had some of my Democratic colleagues say, well, Daniel, it's not that important. I'm like, no, you're right. Not every bill is important. We don't die on every hill. But when we find something important, we go down kicking and screaming. We do 40 amendments. We make this painful. And we let the public know so that the public is aware what their legislature is doing while they're not paying attention. When that bill passed, I looked in the gallery. There was 5 people in the gallery watching us as we were voting on the expansion of what was the most detrimental thing to public education to happen in 20 years in Arizona. It shouldn't be that way. But it's because they were forcing it through our system, which is a little bit broken, and because they suspended some of the rules. So what we need to do as Democrats is fight back harder and smarter. Some of my colleagues, God love them, fight back on every bill. I remember a 2.5-hour discussion on tires and the definition of waste tires. Important, but not something that we stake our flag in and say we're going to die on this hill. But when it came to abortion, when it came to gun violence prevention, when it came to fighting for education, those are the things that we as Democrats need to stand up for. And unfortunately, sometimes we're too timid in our tactics. And I think that's where I'm pushing that whoever is the leader next time has that fighting mentality. Yeah. We work with them when we have to, because we know that they're in the majority. But also, if they're going to fight to get something through and they don't need any of us, then we shouldn't make it easy on them. We make it as hard as humanly possible. until we take back the majority in the House and the Senate and hopefully the governor. So that all students, regardless of what zip code they were born into or are growing up in, have the same opportunities in Nebraska and Idaho and Arizona, from Yuma to Phoenix to Tucson to Sahuarita. Everybody should have the same opportunities. What you do with those opportunities, up to you. But we should make sure that all the kids have opportunities to be successful. So what I do every time I run, and I've been doing this since I ran in 2011 for the school board, is I get a group of young people who've never been involved in the process. We give kids who otherwise couldn't afford to do something like volunteering on a campaign an opportunity. And again, it's not a lot, but I also give them gas cards. I also train them and I feed them every time they come, again, to create that positive experience. So we had a bunch of interns who are from the community. We bring kids and young people from the communities that we're hoping to turn out. Additionally, what we also did was we made a concerted and concentrated investment in paid canvassing. So if you look at the numbers in Santa Cruz County, we had more provisional ballots in 2016 than we'd had in a really long time. And the reason that was because we were literally going to people's doors and saying, we will sit here and wait until you finish your ballot so that we know that you know how to get it done. Because there were people who, again, had never done it before, who were concerned about making a mistake. One of the things that horrified me is I knocked on a door of a woman who was 84 or 85 in 2016. She had registered to vote for the first time because she'd just become a citizen a couple years before, had never actually voted, and she had gotten her ballot and had let it sit on her table in her kitchen for 4 weeks almost. This is the weekend before the election. And she didn't want to make a mistake and said, well, it's better that I just don't turn it in than that I make a mistake. And we heard that story repeated all over. So in Green Valley, we don't have that problem. You have to kind of keep people away from the polls. You have to hold them back so that they, in Green Valley, we don't have the turnout problem that we have in South Tucson or in Santa Cruz County. In order for us to win statewide, we need to boost turnout in places like Santa Cruz County. So as much as I would love for you all to knock on some doors in Green Valley and talk to your voters, 95% of them are going to vote no matter what. And the big thing is persuading them to vote for the right people. But they're going to be voting. In Nogales and in Santa Cruz County, the problem is making sure that they know how to vote. So they have voting centers that make it really easy for people to go to any polling location. But making sure that those who have those provisional ballots, we have the money at the end to send those paid canvassers to knock on those doors and say, you've had that ballot sitting on your kitchen table for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It's too late to send it back in the mail, but we can work with you and we can get it to a polling location on Tuesday. We provided rides. We picked up people from all over Santa Cruz County to take them to a polling location or to drop off their early ballot, and that's the kind of work that it's going to take. That's why I'm saying that's where we need to build out that infrastructure, because unfortunately we've had a lot of elected officials who, again, don't build out that infrastructure. They're instead, let's just keep doing what we've been doing. And I keep saying, if it had worked, we would have taken back the House 45 years ago and the Senate 20 years ago. So it's been 8 years since we've had a statewide elected Democrat. That is a problem. And the problem will only get better if we make that investment in these low turnout communities. And that's where, again, we need your support, we need your help. If you want to come in and sign up to drive people, you don't have to get down and knock on doors. I know that there are a lot of people who say, I don't like talking, I don't like bugging people. If you'd be willing to drive, we will find volunteers that will actually get down and do the door knocking. Usually kids that are a lot younger than all of us who will be very energetic about going and talking to voters. But if you're willing to volunteer to drive, if you're willing to volunteer to cook food for a canvas, these are all things that you can do to make sure that we're successful. Because it's going to take all of us putting in our little bit. Because at the end of the day, if we all put in a little bit, we can take back the state of Arizona and make sure that we don't let it keep being seen as this place around the country where Joe Arpaio and Doug Ducey and Jan Brewer are the first things people think of when they think of Arizona.
You use that word. What does that mean?
So Clean Elections is a publicly funded system of campaign funding. So they take monies from fees at the courts to help create a pot of money. So it's not actually tax dollars, it's fees that are collected. So if you're a clean elections candidate, you have to collect 200 or so signatures and $5 contributions.